Okay, so today we're diving into something that I think is super relevant to a lot of folks out there,
Yeah.
cybersecurity, but specifically
Right.
for those mid-sized businesses here in Spain, not the huge corporations, not the tiny startups, but that really important middle ground.
Exactly.
And we've got some really interesting material to dig into. It's from a Spanish radio program that focused specifically on this topic.
Yeah.
And they had some real experts on, people who really live and breathe this stuff.
Oh, that's great.
And even better, they managed to get an interview with Josu Arriabalaga. He's the CEO of Factum.
Factum.
Factum,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course. Cybersecurity firm, now part of Grupo Santander.
Exactly. So we're talking about some serious players in this field. So our mission today is to pull out the most important insights from all of this
Okay.
to help you understand the challenges these mid-sized businesses face,
The vulnerabilities they might have and what they can actually do to protect themselves. And we're going to try to do it without getting too lost in the technical weeds,
Sounds good.
Make it practical.
Yeah, practical advice for folks out there.
So one of the things that really jumped out at me from the radio show was this idea that when we think about cybersecurity, we often picture these huge corporations with their dedicated security teams and, tons of resources.
Right, unlimited budgets.
Exactly. But what they really highlighted was that these mid-sized businesses here in Spain, they're a huge part of the economy.
Oh, absolutely.
Lots of employees.
Big revenue.
Significant revenue. And they're facing many of the same threats as those big companies.
Yeah, but without those, big budgets and big teams.
Exactly. And that creates a really interesting and, frankly, kind of dangerous situation, right?
Oh, for sure. And it's easy to think that these cybercriminals are only going after the big, well-known brands. But what we learned from this program is that their main goal is actually pretty straightforward. Money.
Yeah, it's all about the profit, right?
It's all about the profit. They're looking for the best return on their effort, and they don't really care if a company is big or small, famous or not. If they see an opportunity to make money, they'll take it.
That's a really important point for people to understand. You don't have to be a multinational to be a target.
Exactly.
So let's talk about Factum a little bit. They were founded in 2009, which, that was kind of the early days of cybersecurity as we know it today.
Yeah, before it became, a household term.
Yeah, for sure.
Before everyone was talking about it.
Exactly. So they've really seen how the whole landscape has changed over time.
They've had a front row seat, that's for sure.
And the fact that Banco Santander acquired them back in 2021, well, that just shows how crucial cybersecurity has become.
Yeah, and not just for banks.
No, not at all.
Every business needs to be paying attention.
It's really across the board. Okay, so how has this threat landscape changed, I guess, since Factum was founded, since, the early 2000s?
Well, one of the biggest changes, and this was something the experts on the radio show talked about a lot, is the motivation of these cybercriminals. Back then, the goals were maybe a bit less defined.
Yeah, more about disruption, maybe.
Yeah, or notoriety.
Kind of messing things up.
Exactly.
Sure, they're good in that soap.
But now it's almost entirely about direct financial gain.
And that shift, that focus on profit, well, that's a big reason why we've seen this huge increase in the number of attacks.
Oh, absolutely. In Cybe, they reported a 25% rise in the past year alone. That's a lot. A quarter more attacks.
Yeah, that's a pretty scary number.
It is.
And then you combine that increase in attacks with the fact that some of these mid-sized businesses might not be investing enough in security.
Yeah, because it can be seen as an expense, right?
Right. And it's not always top of mind.
Until something happens.
Exactly. And that's what they called a perfect storm.
Oh, yeah. It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. You've got these increasingly sophisticated attacks happening more and more often, targeting companies that might not have the defenses in place to stop them.
And a great example of that, which they talked about on the show, was this whole thing with Microsoft releasing patches for 57 vulnerabilities.
Oh, wow. 57.
Yeah, 57. And get this, 7 of them were zero-day exploits. That means, they were already being used by attackers before Microsoft even knew about them.
See, this is why I get nervous about technology. But anyway, sorry, keep going.
No, that's a valid point. It's something to be concerned about. And some of these vulnerabilities, they were really serious.
Like, how serious are we talking?
Well, some of them could allow a regular user to gain administrator privileges.
So, like going from having limited access to being able to do anything on the system.
Exactly. And others, they could enable arbitrary code execution. That basically means attackers could run malicious software on a company's computers from anywhere in the world.
So even if they're physically in another country?
Yeah, they could be halfway across the world and still cause chaos. So that's why patching, keeping your software up to date is so important.
Yeah, it sounds like it's not just a good idea. It's like absolutely essential.
It is.
Especially when you hear that some of these vulnerabilities are being exploited within like 15 days of being discovered. I mean, that's a really short window.
Yes, you've got to be on top of it. You snooze, you lose, basically.
Okay, so we've talked about vulnerabilities in software, but they also brought up this tactic that cybercriminals use, and it's kind of sneaky.
Oh, you mean like exploiting real-world events?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They mentioned the DNA storms in Valencia last year and how they saw these fake SMS messages going around.
Oh, yeah, disguised as weather alerts.
But they actually contain malicious links. So people are thinking they're getting important safety information.
Yeah, but they're actually clicking on something that could steal their information or install malware.
That's really scary because it plays on people's fears, their need to stay safe.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to weather events. It happens around other times, too, like tax season.
Oh, yeah. People are stressed. They're looking for information.
They might be in a hurry, not paying as much attention.
Exactly. Or summer travel deals or Black Friday shopping. Anytime there's a lot of buzz, you can bet these cybercriminals are trying to capitalize on it.
It's all about taking advantage of the situation,
And what makes it even harder is that it's pretty easy to fake those SMS messages and even phone calls.
Oh, yeah. Spoofing, it's a big problem. It makes it so much harder to tell what's real and what's not.
So a message can look like it's from your bank, from the government.
From a company you trust.
Yeah, and people are more likely to click on a link or give out information if they think it's coming from a legitimate source.
It's all about trust, right? And they're exploiting that.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the challenges these mid-sized businesses are actually facing. And this is where Josu Arriabalaga's insights are really helpful.
Yeah, his perspective from running Factum for all these years.
Exactly. And one of the things that really struck me was that even though these cyber threats have become so much more sophisticated since 2009,
I mean, the whole landscape is different.
he still sees this sort of fundamental mindset in some businesses that hasn't really changed.
Like, what do you mean?
They still view cybersecurity as a cost. Something to be minimized.
Oh, I see. Instead of as an investment.
Exactly, like an investment in the future of their business.
Yeah, and that kind of thinking, it's just not realistic anymore.
No, especially when you think about how much businesses rely on technology these days.
I mean, it's everything, right?
Pretty much. I mean,
Yeah.
operations, communications, sales, finances.
That's all digital.
And if those systems go down because of a cyber attack,
The impacts can be huge.
yeah, it can cripple a business. So Jesus actually said something that I thought was really interesting. He said, there are two types of companies. Those that have had a cybersecurity incident and those that will.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it really highlights the fact that this is not a matter of if, but when.
Exactly. And while he did say that more businesses are aware of the risks now,
Probably because they've heard stories, right?
yeah, they've seen what's happened to others.
There's still this gap between awareness and actually taking those necessary steps to protect themselves.
Okay, so what are some of the biggest challenges these mid-sized businesses face when it comes to cybersecurity?
Well, they talked about a few key areas on the radio show. And probably the biggest one, the one that's the hardest to solve with technology alone, is the human factor.
Oh, you mean human error?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's estimated that the majority, like a huge percentage of cyber attacks,
The vast majority.
they start with human error.
It's people clicking on bad links,
Falling for phishing scams?
not following security protocols, simple things, but they can have huge consequences.
With all the advances in artificial intelligence, this is only going to get trickier.
Because AI can make these phishing attacks so much more convincing.
Yeah, and AI can impersonate people, so it's going to get harder and harder to tell what's real and what's not.
It's a real challenge.
Another challenge is that a lot of these businesses, they don't have a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy.
Oh, I see. They're not thinking about the big picture.
Yeah, they might have a firewall here, an antivirus program there, but it's not all connected,
It's like having a bunch of individual puzzle pieces, but no idea what the final picture is supposed to look like.
Exactly, and that leaves gaps in their defenses.
So, for example, they might be great at protecting against viruses, but then they don't have a plan for what to do if they get hit with ransomware.
Right, so they're protected in one area, but completely vulnerable in another.
Exactly.
And then there are resource constraints, which are a huge issue. These mid-sized businesses, they often struggle to find and keep qualified cybersecurity professionals.
Yeah, it's a competitive field, and those people are in high demand.
And they can be expensive, and these companies might not have the budget for a big security team.
Or for all the latest and greatest security software.
Yeah, and then there's another risk that people don't always think about, which is supply chain risk. A lot of these mid-sized businesses, they're part of larger supply chains, right?
Oh, I see. So they could be a weak link that attackers target to get to a bigger company.
Exactly. Like a hacker might compromise a smaller supplier to try and get access to the network of a larger customer.
It's like finding the weakest point in the fence and breaking through there.
Exactly. Now, AI is a really interesting part of this whole conversation because on the one hand, it's being used by cybercriminals to make their attacks more sophisticated.
Oh, yeah. AI is a powerful tool.
But it's also being used by security professionals to build better defenses.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it really is.
It can be used for good or for bad.
On the offensive side, AI lets cybercriminals automate their attacks, make them bigger, more widespread.
And that means more companies are potentially at risk.
And it's not as targeted as it used to be.
Yeah, in the past, attacks were often very specific. Like they'd go after a particular company or a specific individual.
But AI allows them to cast a much wider net.
So even if you think you're not a target, you could still be caught up in something.
That's a scary thought.
It is. But AI is also being used to fight back. It can help optimize those security monitoring systems so they can detect unusual activity faster.
Oh, so it's like having an extra set of eyes constantly watching for threats.
Exactly. And it can automate some of the responses to those threats.
So it can react faster than a human could.
In some cases, yes.
So it really is this constant back and forth, Both sides are using AI to try to outsmart each other.
It's an arms race, and it's only going to get more intense.
And that's why it's so important for businesses to think about the security implications whenever they're implementing AI.
Yeah, you can't just bring in AI without considering the risks.
It's like opening a new door, but you have to make sure you've got a strong lock on it.
Otherwise, you're just inviting trouble.
Now, Factum, they've actually developed a solution specifically for this mid-sized business market. It's called Silum.
Silum. I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, it's designed to address those unique challenges we've been talking about.
And it's based on their 15 years of experience in cybersecurity, right?
Exactly. So they're not just coming in as a tech company. They're coming in as experts who understand the real-world problems.
That's a big difference.
And the goal of Silum is to give these mid-sized businesses access to the same level of cybersecurity knowledge and protection that those big companies have.
Okay, but in a way that's affordable and manageable for them.
Right, because they know these companies might not have huge budgets or dedicated security teams.
So it's tailored to their needs.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that they describe Silum as an accompaniment service.
Accompaniment, like they're not just selling a product and then walking away.
Exactly. It's about guiding these businesses.
Yeah.
Helping them understand their risks, develop a strategy.
And implement it and actually maintain it over time.
And they'll provide support if there's a security incident. So it's not just about prevention.
It's about being prepared for when something does happen.
Yeah, because as we said, it's not a matter of if, but when. And this approach really addresses those challenges we talked about, like the lack of internal expertise.
And the lack of a clear strategic plan.
Exactly. They're not just giving them tools, they're giving them the knowledge and support to actually use those tools effectively.
So they're like a partner working alongside the company?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Now, they did mention that there are sometimes challenges in actually implementing these solutions, like even figuring out who to talk to within the company can be tricky.
Oh, yeah, because in a smaller company, the roles might be less defined.
Right. So who makes the decisions about cybersecurity? Is it the CEO, the CFO, the IT manager?
Could be any of them.
And sometimes the biggest hurdle isn't the technical part of implementing a solution, but the lack of a strategy.
Oh, I see. Companies might buy all these fancy security tools thinking that's enough.
But without a plan, without understanding how everything fits together, it's not as effective.
It's like buying ingredients without a recipe. You might have all the right stuff, but you won't end up with a good meal.
Exactly. So looking ahead to 2025, Josu said that Factum is really focused on this mid-sized business segment. They see it as a huge opportunity.
And Silum is a big part of that strategy.
Yeah, they're investing a lot of resources into developing it further.
Making it even better at meeting the needs of these companies.
When they're really focusing on improving their monitoring and incident response capabilities.
So they can be there to help their clients when they need it most.
And finally, they talked about data protection and governance, which is a huge topic. And they mentioned GDPR, which is the big data protection regulation here in the EU.
Yeah, that's the starting point, the foundation.
And what they really stressed is that company directors, they have a big responsibility to protect the data they collect.
Yeah, it's not just an IT issue anymore.
It's a legal and ethical obligation. And in 2025 and beyond, this is only going to become more important.
Especially with NIS2 coming into play.
Right, that's the new Network and Information Security Directive. It's still being implemented, but it's going to make executives even more accountable for security failures.
So the stakes are getting higher.
Yeah, there could be some pretty hefty penalties if companies don't comply. And they gave some really practical advice for companies that want to improve their data security.
Like what kind of advice?
Well, first, talk to the experts. Get some guidance, have them assess your vulnerabilities.
Yeah, get a professional opinion.
Keep your software up to date. Always, always, always. And then implement a multi-layered approach to security. So that means having preventative measures like firewalls and intrusion detection systems.
Yeah, to stop attacks from happening in the first place.
But also have ongoing monitoring systems so you can catch any breaches early.
Because it's not if you'll be attacked, but when.
Exactly. And then the other crucial thing is to have a solid incident response plan.
So you know what to do if something does happen.
It's like having a fire drill. You might not ever need it, but if you do, you'll be glad you practiced.
It's about being prepared.
Because at the end of the day, data is essential for pretty much every business out there.
Healthcare, finance, you name it.
It's the lifeblood of the modern economy.
Yeah.
So protecting it, that's not just a technical issue.
It's essential for survival.
So I hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. Think about your own organization or a business,
Or even just personally, how you protect your own data.
Yeah, that's a good point. Are the risks really understood? Is there a clear strategy in place? What can you do today to make things more secure?
Because cybersecurity, it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
You have to keep learning, keep adapting.
And stay ahead of the curve.
Because the bad guys, they're not slowing down. So we can't either.
Well said.